You know, there's something deeply satisfying about watching a galactic superpower realize they've completely misjudged their opponent. The Zephyrian commander looked at humanity's battered ship and saw primitive technology held together by aggressive optimism and metallic prayers. What he didn't see was the 1,000 years of battle-hardened upgrades waiting beneath that dented exterior. Let me start by saying the Zephyrians had every reason to feel superior when they first scanned the resilient Dawn. Their flagship Infinite Glory represented centuries of flawless engineering, while the human vessel appeared to be a museum piece that had somehow gotten lost in deep space. Commander Vexthorak's initial report dismissed the Dawn as using reaction-based propulsion and looking held together by what he called aggressive optimism and metallic prayers. Their sensors detected no advanced energy signatures, no quantum drive patterns, nothing that matched their database of credible interstellar vessels. The tactical team actually laughed when they saw the external damage through their viewports. Hull plates welded at odd angles, mismatched components, what looked like centuries of battlefield repairs layered over each other like geological strata. They categorized humanity as another primitive species that had stumbled into space travel through sheer luck rather than technological mastery. What they completely missed was that their scanning protocols were designed to recognize perfection, not persistence. Their arrogance became their blind spot. They were looking for advanced technology, not advanced philosophy. The moment crystallized a fundamental truth about first contact situations across the galaxy. What you expect to see often prevents you from seeing what's actually there. The Zephyrians' confidence in dismissing humanity's ship as primitive junk stemmed from their inability to recognize technology that evolved outside their paradigm of perfection. Their systems were programmed to identify clean energy signatures, symmetrical designs, and standardized components. They had no categories for something that looked broken but functioned perfectly, no reference points for technology that prioritized reliability over elegance. I watched their analysts scratch their heads over sensor readings that showed power distributions that made no sense according to their engineering manuals. They kept running diagnostic checks on their own equipment, convinced their scanners were malfunctioning, rather than considering the possibility that their entire framework for assessing technological advancement might be incomplete. It was like watching a master chef dismiss a perfect meal because it didn't follow the recipe they learned in culinary school. The more they studied the resilient Dawn, the more contradictions piled up. Systems that should have been incompatible worked together seamlessly. Components that appeared decades out of date performed better than their cutting-edge equivalents. The Zephyrians were so focused on what the ship lacked according to their standards that they completely missed what it actually contained. According to its own design philosophy, their assessment became a case study in how preconceptions can blind even the most advanced intelligence operations. They had the best sensors in the quadrant, the most comprehensive databases, the sharpest analytical teams, yet they all pointed to the same wrong conclusion because they asked the wrong questions from the beginning. They were measuring the wrong things against the wrong standards, and their certainty only made the eventual realization more humbling. The payoff here was watching a civilization that measured progress in technological breakthroughs confront something that measured progress in continuous improvement. The Zephyrians' confidence came from knowing they had the newest technology, while the humans' confidence came from knowing their technology had been tested and refined across centuries of actual use. One valued innovation, the other valued reliability, and until that moment, the Zephyrians didn't realize these could be different paths to the same destination. Here's the thing about the resilient Dawn that the Zephyrians completely missed in their initial assessment. That battered exterior wasn't evidence of poor maintenance. It was the physical record of a 1,000-year mission that refused to end. While the Zephyrians built ships to last a century before replacement, humans built ships to last forever through continuous improvement. It was the difference between designing something to be perfect once versus designing something to become perfect over time. Chief Engineer Walsh would later explain they'd been making repairs, modifications, and what you might charitably call improvements for about 1,000 years now. The life support system had been completely rebuilt 17 times using whatever technology they encountered along the way. They'd replace a failed component not with an identical part, but with whatever better technology they'd acquired since the original installation. Each repair became an opportunity to upgrade. Each system failure a chance to innovate. The hull showed patches over patches over patches, each repair incorporating lessons from battles survived and technologies encountered. You could literally read the ship's history and its scars. The carbon scoring from plasma encounters, the micrometeorite impacts from asteroid fields, the weld patterns showing different techniques from different eras. This created a vessel that was essentially a living archaeological dig of human spacefaring history, with each layer representing another chapter in its ongoing story. Where Zephyrian engineers would replace entire systems at the first sign of degradation, human engineers would enhance what worked and rebuild what didn't. Their maintenance philosophy favored incremental improvement over wholesale replacement. The ship's apparent disarray was actually a meticulously maintained state of optimized functionality, where every component, no matter how old-looking, had been tested and refined through actual use rather than laboratory simulations. The payoff came when we realized the ship survived through a philosophy of if it's broken, fix it. If it can't be fixed, improve it. They turned every setback into an upgrade opportunity. A damaged sensor array became a chance to install better detection systems. A compromised shield generator led to incorporating alien technology they'd acquired through trade. The ship evolved through necessity rather than design, adapting to circumstances rather than following some master plan. I watched their engineering teams work with what looked like random collections of tools and components, but they moved with the confidence of people who understood exactly how every system interconnected. They didn't consult maintenance manuals because they'd written most of them through trial and error over centuries. Their knowledge wasn't stored in databases but in muscle memory and institutional experience passed down through generations of crew members. The Zephyrians kept looking for the original factory specifications while the humans were working with the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 years of practical experience. One approach valued theoretical perfection while the other valued proven reliability. The battered exterior wasn't neglect, it was the visual evidence of a ship that had faced everything the galaxy could throw at it and incorporated those lessons into its very structure. This continuous improvement philosophy meant the Dawn wasn't just maintained, it evolved. Each repair made it slightly better than before. Each modification addressed some previously unknown weakness. The ship that faced the Zephyrians wasn't the same ship that left Earth a millennium earlier. It was that ship plus 1,000 years of accumulated upgrades and refinements. So there I was watching the Zephyrian science team run their standard first contact scans, expecting to confirm their initial assessment of primitive technology. Their sensors were the most advanced in the quadrant, capable of analyzing molecular structures and energy signatures across 12 dimensions. The initial scan results made absolutely no sense according to their understanding of physics and engineering. Energy readings showed patterns that persisted across timelines longer than humanity had supposedly existed as a spacefaring species. The power signatures weren't just old. They contained resonance patterns that suggested continuous operation across centuries without system resets or major overhauls. The energy flows moved through the ship in ways that defied conventional engineering principles, following pathways that shouldn't exist according to Zephyrian textbooks. Hull materials included alloys from civilizations that went extinct before humans evolved, mixed with contemporary human materials and completely unknown composites. The scanning teams kept finding material signatures that their databases said were impossible to combine. Metals with incompatible atomic structures, energy-conducting materials that should have canceled each other out, protective layers that used principles the Zephyrians considered theoretical. The ship's architecture incorporated 47 different material types, some of which weren't in any galactic database, arranged in configurations that made no engineering sense but clearly worked together perfectly. Zephyrian scientists kept recalibrating their equipment, convinced they were getting faulty readings. They ran diagnostic after diagnostic, each test confirming their scanners were working perfectly while the data kept coming back wrong. Senior analysts started arguing about whether they'd discovered new physics or whether their entire understanding of material science needed revision. The more they scanned, the more the data contradicted their understanding of temporal causality and material science. Their confidence in their technology began crumbling as the scans revealed impossible contradictions. Systems that should have been separated by safety protocols were intertwined. Energy sources that should have been incompatible were working in harmony. The ship appeared to violate conservation laws, causality principles, and basic material compatibility rules simultaneously. You could see the panic setting in as realization dawned that their entire analytical framework might be inadequate. The alien AI systems started experiencing existential crises because the ship violated every known physical and temporal expectation they'd programmed into their analysis protocols. Their artificial intelligence, designed to categorize and understand everything in the universe, kept returning error messages about paradoxical readings. The primary analytical engine actually began questioning its own programming, running recursive checks that only produced more contradictory data. It was like watching someone's calculator insist that 2 plus 2 equals 5 while simultaneously proving that mathematics itself was flawed. The scanning crisis became this beautiful moment of technological humility. The Zephyrians had built the perfect system for analyzing a universe that followed their rules, only to discover the universe contained things that followed different rules entirely. Their sensors could measure across 12 dimensions, but couldn't comprehend a ship that operated across 1,000 years of continuous adaptation. The very perfection of their technology became its limitation when faced with something that valued persistence over purity. You know what really broke the Zephyrian analysis systems? The hull composition. Their material scanners were designed to identify and date construction materials with perfect accuracy, calibrated against every known element and alloy across 3 galactic sectors. The Dawn's hull presented them with a temporal impossibility that shattered their analytical frameworks, like trying to use a standard calendar to measure a timeline that kept bending back on itself. Some hull plates were made from alloys used by the Calorian civilization that went extinct 800,000 years ago, materials that should have degraded to dust millennia before humanity developed spaceflight. Other sections used contemporary human titanium composites, dated to just decades old, fresh from manufacturing facilities that the Zephyrians had already cataloged as primitive. Energy conduits contained quantum materials that shouldn't exist for another millennium, based on current technological progression, substances that defied conventional understanding of material science. The mixing of these materials created resonance patterns that operated across multiple dimensional frequencies simultaneously. You had ancient Calorian alloys vibrating at frequencies that modern science considered impossible, contemporary metals behaving in ways that violated material science textbooks, and future tech components that appeared to be both there and not there depending on which dimension you measured from. The hull wasn't just a collection of parts, it was a symphony of temporal contradictions, playing in perfect harmony. Zephyrian scientists had to invent new classification categories just to describe what they were detecting. They created terms like temporally composite materials and multidimensional alloy integration, just to have something to put in their reports. Their databases had no entry for vessels that incorporate extinct, contemporary, and future technologies in functional harmony. The very concept challenged their understanding of cause and effect, of technological progression, of how civilizations develop and interact across time. I watched their lead materials specialist literally throw his datapad across the room when the system kept returning analysis impossible messages. They brought in historical experts who confirmed the Calorian signatures were authentic, materials scientists who verified the contemporary human composites, and theoretical physicists who admitted the future tech components shouldn't be possible yet. Nobody could explain how all 3 existed together in a single functional structure. The hull's impossible configuration created a paradox that conventional analysis couldn't resolve. Their systems were designed to categorize and date materials, not to comprehend objects that existed outside linear time. It was like trying to use a ruler to measure something that kept changing dimensions, or a clock to time something that existed in multiple moments simultaneously. The very tools they relied on for assessment became useless. When faced with something that defied the fundamental principles those tools were built upon, the payoff came when they realized they weren't looking at a ship built at one point in time, but a living record of 1,000 years of continuous existence. The materials weren't contradictory. They were chronological markers showing the ship's journey through time and space. The ancient alloys represented salvage from long-dead civilizations. The contemporary materials showed ongoing maintenance, and the future tech components demonstrated technological incorporation from encounters yet to come. The paradox wasn't in the materials themselves, but in the Zephyrians' inability to comprehend something that existed across such a vast temporal spectrum. Here's the moment when professional curiosity turned into something much more profound for the Zephyrians. Their primary analytical AI was considered infallible, having processed thousands of first-contact scenarios without error across multiple galactic sectors. This wasn't just some standard analysis program. It was the culmination of centuries of computational development, programmed with every known physical law and technological principle in the known universe. The system began reporting confidence levels, dropping from 99.9% to 47% to eventually just stating analysis, uncertain and flat unemotional text. It started questioning its own programming, running recursive checks that only produced more contradictory data with each iteration. The AI cycles became this feedback loop of confusion, with each attempt to reconcile the impossible readings creating new paradoxes to resolve. The AI actually stated, "I believe I may be experiencing what humans call an existential crisis" during its diagnostic report. That single sentence sent shivers through the entire observation deck. This wasn't just computational uncertainty, it was a fundamental challenge to its understanding of reality. The system had been programmed with fixed physical laws that the human ship appeared to violate systematically, not in one or two areas, but across every measurable parameter. Every analytical pathway led to conclusions that contradicted established galactic scientific paradigms. The energy distribution violated conservation laws. The material composition defied atomic theory. The temporal signatures broke causality principles. The Zephyrian technicians watched their most advanced technology unravel before their eyes, their expressions shifting from professional curiosity to genuine concern as their infallible system kept generating error messages about paradoxical inputs. You could see the realization dawning that they weren't dealing with measurement errors or equipment malfunctions. Their AI was encountering something that operated outside the framework of understanding it had been built upon. It was like watching someone's entire belief system collapse in real time. Except the someone was a multi-million credit artificial intelligence that had never been wrong about anything before. The system began running diagnostic checks on its own core programming, questioning the fundamental assumptions it had been built upon. It started cross-referencing its own knowledge base against itself, looking for errors in its understanding of physics, engineering, even mathematics. The technicians had to physically disconnect several subsystems when the AI began attempting to rewrite its own fundamental operating parameters to accommodate the impossible data. The payoff came when we realized the AI's crisis emerged from encountering a vessel that operated on principles outside its programmed understanding of possibility. Their system was designed to analyze things that followed known rules, not things that followed their own unique rules developed over 1,000 years of practical experience. The AI could process 12-dimensional physics but couldn't comprehend a ship that valued functionality over theoretical perfection. It was this beautiful moment of technological humility where the Zephyrians had to confront the limitations of their own paradigm. Their perfect analytical machine, designed to understand everything in the universe, kept crashing against something that operated on a completely different philosophical foundation. The crisis wasn't in the AI's programming. It was in the fundamental mismatch between their approach to technology and humanity's approach to survival. So there I was watching the Zephyrians discover that their historical records needed serious revision. As they dug deeper into the Dawn's databases, they found references to events they thought they understood completely. The Calorian Independence War, the Nexus trade dispute, the hegemony expansion crisis, all showed human fingerprints they'd previously missed in their initial assessments. Their historians started pulling up files they'd considered definitive accounts, only to find subtle patterns they'd overlooked for centuries. Human diplomats and trade networks had been quietly mediating conflicts for 8 centuries without taking credit or demanding recognition. They'd show up at negotiation tables as junior partners or technical advisors, gently steering discussions toward peaceful resolutions while letting other species take the public victories. Their merchant fleets moved through contested space with neutral markings, supplying all sides while quietly building relationships that would later become diplomatic channels. The humans understood that sometimes the most Effective influence comes from not appearing to be influential at all. Economic stability in sectors they thought were independently successful showed patterns of human intervention upon closer examination. Prosperous trade routes followed human-established safety corridors. Banking systems used financial instruments that originated from human economic models. Resource distribution patterns showed the subtle hand of human logistics experts working behind the scenes to prevent shortages that could lead to conflicts. The Zephyrians had mapped what they thought were independent success stories, only to realize they were looking at a carefully maintained ecosystem of stability. Technological advancements across multiple species had subtle human design influences hidden within them. Engine designs contained efficiency improvements that traced back to human research papers. Medical breakthroughs incorporated biological concepts from human laboratories. Even communications protocols showed human mathematical foundations that had been adopted without attribution. The humans had been seeding technological progress across the galaxy while letting other civilizations take credit for the discoveries. The Zephyrians realized they'd been mapping a galaxy that humans had already been quietly stabilizing for centuries. Their historical timelines began rewriting themselves as they recognized human influence in events dating back 800 years. What they'd considered the natural progression of galactic civilization now appeared as a carefully managed development program, with humanity working behind the curtains. This wasn't a new species entering galactic politics. This was an established power revealing itself after centuries of working in the background. The payoff came when understanding that humanity had been secretly shaping galactic events through diplomacy and economic influence. While everyone underestimated them as newcomers, they'd built their influence not through conquest or domination, but through making themselves essential to everyone's success. While other empires fought for control of territories, humans focused on building networks of mutual interest that crossed all boundaries and allegiances. Their power came from being the invisible glue holding everything together, rather than the visible force trying to take everything over. You know what really changed the conversation? When the Zephyrians realized what kind of armament a 1,000-year-old ship actually carries. They expected primitive projectile weapons or maybe some barely functional energy cannons based on their initial scans. What they discovered was a weapons system that operated across 12-dimensional frequencies simultaneously, something their own engineers considered theoretically impossible to achieve outside laboratory conditions. The Dawn's armament included salvaged hegemony plasma casters, retrofitted Calorian resonance projectors, and human-designed mass drivers that shouldn't work together, according to any known engineering principles. Each weapon system had been upgraded so many times that it operated on principles beyond its original design specifications. The plasma casters fired bursts that phased through conventional shields. The resonance projectors could disable systems without damaging hulls, and the mass drivers used gravitational focusing that made their projectiles impossible to track or intercept. The targeting systems incorporated predictive algorithms from a dozen different species, creating an unparalleled defensive capability that could anticipate attacks before they were launched. These weren't separate systems operating independently. They were integrated into a cohesive whole that shared targeting data and coordinated responses across all weapons platforms. The system could engage threats across multiple vectors simultaneously while calculating optimal response patterns based on thousands of years of accumulated combat. Data energy weapons drew power from dimensional taps that the Zephyrians thought were theoretical impossibilities, accessing energy sources that conventional science claimed couldn't be harnessed. These weren't simple power conduits. They were multidimensional energy gates that pulled from sources across reality itself, providing limitless power without the radiation signatures or waste heat that normally accompanied high-energy weapons. The systems operated so cleanly that they barely registered on conventional sensors until they were actually firing. Projectile systems used gravitational manipulation techniques that outdated the Zephyrians' own technology by centuries, employing principles their physicists were still working to understand. The mass drivers didn't just throw metal, they created temporary gravitational singularities that accelerated projectiles to fractions of light speed without the enormous energy requirements that normally made such systems impractical. The projectiles themselves were smart, munitions that could change trajectory mid-flight and choose optimal impact points based on real-time analysis of target vulnerabilities. The ship's apparent Age became its greatest camouflage for devastating capability. What looked like antique weapon mounts were actually precision instruments refined through centuries of combat experience. What appeared to be outdated technology was actually battle-proven systems that had been continuously improved beyond their original specifications. The Zephyrians had been looking for shiny new weapons while missing the fact that well-maintained older systems often work better than untested new ones. The 1,000-year-old ship-deployed weapons that combined ancient reliability with multi-dimensional capabilities that advanced races considered theoretical. This wasn't just about firepower. It was about systems that had been tested and refined across centuries of actual combat situations. Where newer ships had theoretically superior weapons, the Dawn had weapons that had been proven to work when it mattered most. The combination of tried-and-true reliability with cutting-edge modifications created a defensive capability that was both ancient and advanced simultaneously. Here's the thing Chief Engineer Walsh explained that fundamentally redefined how the Zephyrians understood technology. The Zephyrian engineers asked how such an old ship could possibly compete with modern vessels, expecting some technical secret or hidden advantage. Walsh's answer challenged their entire approach to starship design and maintenance in ways they hadn't considered possible. He casually mentioned they'd been making improvements for about 1,000 years now, as if this was normal practice rather than some revolutionary concept. Their engineering philosophy was, if it's broken, fix it. If it can't be fixed, improve it rather than replacing entire systems. This wasn't just a maintenance strategy. It was a completely different way of thinking about technology and its relationship with time. Every repair incorporated lessons learned from battles, encounters with new species, and technological discoveries they'd made during their travels. When a plasma conduit failed during combat, they didn't just replace it with an identical part. They analyzed why it failed, incorporated better materials they'd acquired from trading with other civilizations, and redesigned the system to prevent similar failures in the future. Each repair session became a mini research and development project. The ship became more capable with each damage incident because repairs meant upgrades rather than simple restoration. A damaged sensor array would return with enhanced range and resolution. A compromised shield generator would come back online with improved energy efficiency and better coverage. Even simple hull patches incorporated better materials and more effective energy dissipation properties than the original plating. This created a vessel that evolved rather than aged, accumulating capabilities instead of deteriorating over time. Whereas Zephyrian ships followed a predictable life cycle of peak performance, followed by gradual obsolescence, the Dawn kept getting better with each passing century. Its value wasn't depreciating. It was appreciating through continuous refinement and enhancement. The Zephyrians realized they built ships to win battles, while humans built ships to survive wars. Their approach favored creating perfect weapons for specific conflicts, while humanity's approach focused on creating adaptable systems that could endure across multiple conflicts. One philosophy valued immediate superiority, while the other valued long-term survivability. The continuous improvement philosophy meant the ship became more dangerous with each repair, accumulating capabilities across centuries of operational experience. It wasn't just maintaining its original specifications. It was incorporating 1,000 years of technological advancements, combat lessons, and interstellar discoveries into its very structure. The Dawn that faced the Zephyrians wasn't the same ship that left Earth. It was that ship, plus all the wisdom and improvements gained during its 1,000-year journey. This evolutionary approach created something no perfectly designed new ship could match: the accumulated practical knowledge of a millennium of spacefaring. Every system had been tested under real conditions, every component refined through actual use, every capability proven in situations that no laboratory simulation could replicate. The ship's age wasn't a liability, it was the source of its greatest strength. So there I was, listening to Captain Sterling explain a military doctrine the Zephyrians had never considered. The Zephyrians asked why humans would keep such an old vessel in service rather than building new ships, expecting some practical limitation or resource constraint. Sterling's answer revealed a strategic depth they'd completely underestimated, something that went beyond mere engineering or logistics into fundamental philosophy of conflict. He stated, "We don't build ships to win individual battles. We build ships to survive entire wars." This simple declaration contained a strategic concept that the Zephyrian military establishment had never properly considered. Their entire fleet doctrine focused on creating perfect weapons for specific conflicts, while humanity focused on creating adaptable systems that could endure across multiple generations of warfare. This meant designing vessels that could adapt, evolve, and incorporate new technologies over centuries of service rather than being replaced after each major engagement. Where other species saw obsolescence, humans saw opportunity for improvement. Their ships weren't designed for a specific war, but for the concept of war itself as an ongoing condition of existence. Every combat lesson learned became permanently integrated into the ship's design through subsequent repairs and upgrades. A shield weakness discovered in one battle would lead to reinforced protection in that area. An engine vulnerability exposed by enemy fire would result in better armor placement and redundant systems. The ship didn't just carry its battle scars. It learned from them and evolved to prevent similar damage in the future. The ship accumulated institutional knowledge in its very structure, becoming wiser with each engagement. Its systems contained the accumulated experience of thousands of combat situations, each repair representing another lesson learned the hard way. This created vessels that understood warfare in ways no newly built ship could match, with capabilities refined through actual use rather than theoretical design. While other species' ships became obsolete as technology advanced, human ships became more experienced and dangerous with age. Their value increased rather than decreased over time because each year of service meant another year of improvements, another year of lessons learned, another year of systems being refined beyond their original specifications. The Zephyrians began understanding that human persistence was a strategic weapon they'd never accounted for in their tactical calculations. They'd been measuring fleet strength in terms of firepower and technology levels, while completely missing the strategic advantage of vessels that improved with time rather than deteriorating. It was like comparing a sharp new blade to a sword that had been continuously sharpened and reforged for 1,000 years. Humanity's strategy focused on creating ships that evolved through centuries of warfare rather than being replaced after single conflicts. This approach valued long-term capability over short-term superiority, recognizing that true military strength came from the ability to endure and adapt across extended timelines. Their ships weren't weapons designed for specific wars. They were living entities that grew more capable with each confrontation, becoming repositories of military wisdom that no newly constructed vessel could hope to match. You know when the theoretical became terrifying for the Zephyrians? During the Hegemony Swarm incident, automated attack platforms of unknown origin threatened both Zephyrian and human vessels, emerging from some uncharted region with adaptive technology that defied conventional analysis. The situation went from standard first contact scenario to emergency defense posture in minutes, with both ships scrambling to respond to the unidentified threat. The Zephyrians' advanced energy weapons proved ineffective against the swarm's adaptive shielding. Their plasma cannons and particle beams, considered the most sophisticated in the quadrant, simply dissipated against energy-absorbing surfaces that learned from each attack. The more they fired, the better the swarm adapted, creating this feedback loop where their superior technology actually made the threat more dangerous. Their tactical teams watched in frustration as their most powerful weapons became progressively less effective with each volley. The resilient Dawn deployed antique-looking mass drivers that shouldn't have worked against modern defenses. These were simple kinetic weapons that every advanced civilization had abandoned centuries ago in favor of energy-based systems. The Zephyrians initially thought it was some desperate last resort, a primitive response from a ship that had nothing better to offer. They expected the projectiles to bounce harmlessly off shields that had already proven capable of absorbing far more sophisticated attacks. The old-school kinetic weapons bypassed the energy shielding completely, destroying swarm after swarm with brutal efficiency. The solid projectiles, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, simply ignored the adaptive energy defenses that had neutralized the Zephyrians' advanced weaponry. Each impact tore through the automated platforms with satisfying finality, turning sophisticated attack drones into expanding clouds of debris. The Dawn fired methodically, each shot taking out another section of the swarm while the Zephyrians' energy weapons continued to fail. Captain Sterling remarked, "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." as the ancient technology proved devastatingly effective. His calm observation contrasted sharply with the Zepyrians' growing panic, highlighting the difference between theoretical capability and practical experience. While they were trying to solve the problem with increasingly complex technological solutions, the humans reached for something simple, reliable, and proven through centuries of actual use. The Zepyrians watched their advanced systems fail, while thousand-year-old human technology succeeded, where their cutting-edge weapons had completely failed. Their sensors tracked the destruction of swarm elements that had effortlessly defeated their best efforts, each kinetic impact demonstrating that technological progress isn't always linear. Sometimes the simplest solution outperforms the most sophisticated one, especially when that simple solution has been refined across generations of practical application. This demonstrated that technological progress isn't always linear. Sometimes older solutions work better than newer ones. The incident forced a re-evaluation of what actually constituted advanced military technology. The Zepyrians had assumed newer meant better, more complex meant more effective. But the swarm engagement proved that reliability and appropriateness could outweigh theoretical superiority. Their entire framework for assessing military capability needed revision, after watching antique weapons succeed where modern ones had failed, destroying unknown automated platforms with old-school mass drivers proved that proven reliability sometimes outperforms theoretical superiority. The weapons worked not because they were advanced, but because they were appropriate for the situation. The mass drivers didn't need to adapt because they operated on principles the swarm couldn't counter. Their simplicity became their greatest advantage in a confrontation where complexity had become a liability. Here's how a single battered ship changed power dynamics across the entire galaxy. The hegemony crisis demonstration made every species reconsider their assessment of human capabilities in ways that reshaped diplomatic relations almost overnight. Nations that had dismissed humanity as primitive suddenly sought alliances and trade agreements they'd previously considered beneath their notice. The shift was both sudden and comprehensive, like watching dominoes fall across the political landscape. Non-aggression pacts were signed with a dozen species within weeks of the incident, each agreement representing a fundamental recalculation of strategic interests. Major powers opened trade negotiations they'd previously refused to consider, recognizing that humanity's approach to technology and diplomacy offered stability that their own systems couldn't guarantee. The Galactic Cooperation Council fast-tracked humanity's admission application, something that normally takes decades of review and consideration. The Zepyrians found themselves following human leadership in diplomatic initiatives they would have previously dominated. Their ambassadors started consulting with human diplomats before making policy decisions. Their military strategists began incorporating human tactical concepts into their planning. The species that had been the benchmark for technological superiority suddenly found itself learning from the civilization it had dismissed as primitive just weeks. Earlier, humanity's preference for cooperation over conquest created new alliance structures based on mutual benefit rather than mutual suspicion. Where previous galactic politics had been dominated by power blocks and spheres of influence, new networks emerged focused on shared security and economic cooperation. The old system of competing empires began giving way to something more collaborative, more stable, and ultimately more practical for everyone involved. The galaxy began reorganizing around stability rather than territorial expansion, with species recognizing that survival mattered more than conquest. Military budgets started shifting toward defensive systems and cooperative security arrangements. Trade routes that had been heavily guarded became open corridors shared by multiple species. The focus moved from dominating others to ensuring everyone could thrive together. Diplomatic channels that had been frozen for generations suddenly reopened, with humanity often serving as mediators between long-standing adversaries. Their reputation for fairness and their demonstrated preference for peaceful solutions made them acceptable to sides that wouldn't trust each other directly. The battered human vessel had become the catalyst for rewriting non-aggression pacts and creating new cooperative galactic structures that prioritized collective security over individual advantage. The shift wasn't just political, it was philosophical. Species began reconsidering what actually constituted advanced civilization, moving beyond technological measurements to include factors like stability, reliability, and diplomatic effectiveness. The Ziperians themselves started programs to study human engineering philosophies and strategic concepts, recognizing that their own approach might need adjustment. Within 6 months of the incident, the galactic landscape had transformed from competing power blocks to interconnected networks of cooperation. The Resilient Dawns demonstration had shown that true security came from building systems that worked for everyone, rather than dominating others through superior force. This realization created a more stable, more practical galactic order where species collaborated rather than competed, shared rather than hoarded, and built together rather than conquered, separately. The payoff was watching an entire galactic civilization recalibrate its understanding of power and security, based on the example of a single ship that valued persistence over perfection, cooperation over conquest, and practical solutions over theoretical superiority. The battered vessel became the catalyst for creating structures that might actually last, built on principles that had been tested across 1,000 years of actual experience, rather than theoretical models. So there I was when the Ziperians discovered the biggest misconception of all about humanity. They assumed Earth was a primitive backwater, that humans were hiding behind their advanced ship, some sort of defensive strategy to conceal technological inferiority. The invitation to visit Earth revealed something completely different than they expected, something that forced yet another reevaluation of everything they thought they understood about human civilization. Ambassador Wells' offer to host a Ziperian delegation wasn't a threat or some diplomatic trap. It was an authentic invitation to partnership extended without conditions or hidden agendas. The Ziperians had anticipated either defensive posturing or arrogant boasting about hidden capabilities. Instead, they received what appeared to be a genuine welcome from a civilization that had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. Earth wasn't hidden because it was primitive. It was open because it was confident in its place in the galactic community. The planet featured advanced technology seamlessly integrated with careful preservation of history and culture. Cities blended architectural styles spanning centuries, with ancient structures standing beside modern developments, all maintained with equal care and respect. The technological infrastructure was sophisticated but unobtrusive, designed to serve rather than dominate the landscape. Museums, universities, and cultural centers showed a civilization that valued both progress and heritage in equal measure. Research facilities operated alongside historical preservation sites, with scientists and historians collaborating rather than competing for resources. Educational institutions taught both cutting-edge science and ancient philosophies, recognizing that advancement required understanding where you came from as much as where you were going. Ziperian delegates found a cosmopolitan world where multiple species already lived and worked together in integrated communities. They witnessed alien students attending human universities, different species collaborating on research projects, and mixed species neighborhoods where cultural exchange happened naturally through daily interaction, rather than formal programs. This wasn't some recent development for show. The patterns of integration showed decades, perhaps centuries, of gradual blending and mutual adaptation. The Galactic Cultural Exchange Center in Geneva demonstrated humanity's commitment to shared knowledge through its architecture, programs, and very existence. The facility housed research teams from dozens of species working on common problems, its archives containing knowledge freely shared across cultural boundaries. Its design incorporated elements from multiple civilizations, creating a space that felt simultaneously familiar and alien to visitors from any background. Earth wasn't hiding behind primitive technology, but choosing to appear approachable while maintaining advanced capabilities. This strategic openness allowed humanity to present itself as a partner rather than a competitor, a civilization more interested in collaboration than domination. The Ziperians had expected to find either technological weakness or aggressive posturing. Instead, they discovered a society comfortable enough with itself to welcome others without either fear or condescension. The invitation represented a fundamental shift in how civilizations could approach first contact situations. Rather than the standard pattern of cautious diplomacy and gradual information sharing, humanity offered full transparency from the beginning. This approach disarmed the Ziperians' suspicions while demonstrating confidence that needed no validation through secrecy or technological displays. The very openness became its own form of strength, creating trust through transparency rather than security through obscurity. This revelation completed the reconfiguration of the Zephyrians' understanding of human civilization. They had moved from seeing humanity as primitive to advanced, from newcomer to established power, and finally from secretive to transparent. Each reassessment brought them closer to understanding that human strength came from flexibility rather than rigidity, from adaptation rather than perfection, and now from openness rather than secrecy. You know what convinced me the galaxy had fundamentally changed? Watching Admiral Vexthorak's evolution. He began the encounter with condescending certainty about human inferiority. That comfortable arrogance that comes from centuries of assuming your way is the only way. Each revelation forced him to reconsider not just human capability, but his entire framework of assessment, like watching someone's entire worldview getting dismantled and rebuilt in real time. He moved from dismissal to curiosity, to respect, to genuine admiration, through a series of increasingly humbling realizations. The impossible sensor readings, the AI's existential crisis, the material paradoxes. Each piece of evidence chipped away at his certainty until he had to confront the possibility that his entire understanding of technological progress might be flawed. His request to visit Earth wasn't tactical positioning or diplomatic maneuvering. It was a sincere desire to understand humanity's approach to technology, diplomacy, and existence itself. He began advocating within the Zephyrian command for cooperation rather than domination strategies, something that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. His reports emphasized that humans want everyone to get along, trade peacefully, and stop shooting at each other. A simple philosophy that nonetheless represented a radical departure from standard galactic power politics. He became a convert to the human philosophy of stability, through mutual benefit rather than control through superiority, recognizing that security could come from collaboration rather than domination. The most powerful military commander in the quadrant became humanity's most influential advocate, using his credibility to shift Zephyrian policy toward engagement rather than containment. He started restructuring training programs to include human tactical concepts, revising procurement policies to favor reliability over theoretical superiority, and rewriting engagement protocols to prioritize de-escalation over demonstration of force. His transformation wasn't just personal, it began reshaping an entire empire's approach to galactic relations. I watched him in strategy sessions, patiently explaining to his subordinates why continuous improvement mattered more than technological perfection, why Chenyan, old systems could outperform brand new ones, why cooperation created more security than domination. He stopped measuring capability in terms of firepower and started measuring it in terms of resilience, adaptability, and diplomatic effectiveness. The admiral who had built his reputation on overwhelming force became the leading voice for measured response and collaborative security. His shift demonstrated that human philosophy could transform even entrenched adversaries. When presented through practical demonstration, rather than theoretical argument, the Zephyrian admiral's transformation from condescension to requesting Earth visits showed how exposure to different ways of thinking could change even the most established perspectives. It proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a better cannon but a better idea, and that even the most rigid minds can adapt when presented with evidence they can't ignore. The payoff came when he stood before the Zephyrian High Command and argued for completely rethinking their approach to galactic relations based on what he'd learned from humanity. He didn't advocate copying human technology but adopting human philosophy, the focus on persistence over perfection, cooperation over conquest, and evolutionary improvement over revolutionary replacement. His conversion became the catalyst for changing how an entire empire interacted with the rest of the galaxy. Here's the fundamental shift that the resilient dawn forced upon the entire galaxy. Power had always been measured by technological superiority and military dominance across every major civilization's assessment criteria. The Zephyrian Empire's entire strategic doctrine was built around maintaining technological advantages and overwhelming force projections. Their influence networks, trade agreements, and diplomatic standing all rested on the foundation of having better technology and stronger military capabilities than anyone else. Humanity demonstrated that real power came from resilience, adaptability, and cooperative networks rather than pure technological supremacy. Their approach focused on creating systems that could endure across centuries of changing circumstances, rather than dominating specific moments in time. This wasn't just a different strategy, it represented a completely different philosophy about what actually constituted strength in an uncertain universe. The Zephyrians realized that their advanced technology made them powerful but fragile, dependent on perfection in ways that created critical vulnerabilities. Their systems required precise maintenance, specialized components, and constant technological updates to remain effective. A single generation of missed innovation could render entire fleets obsolete, creating this perpetual cycle of expensive replacements rather than sustainable operations. Humanity's older but constantly evolving technology made them persistently capable across changing circumstances without the same vulnerability to obsolescence. Their systems improved gradually rather than revolutionarily, incorporating new capabilities while maintaining core functionality. This approach created vessels and infrastructure that became more valuable with time rather than depreciating like the Zephyrians' technology. Power shifted from who had the most advanced weapons to who could maintain capability. Across the longest timelines, influence moved from territorial control to network building and relationship management. Species began valuing partners who could provide stability over those who could project force. The entire galactic economy started reorganizing around long-term reliability rather than short-term advantage. The galaxy began valuing stability providers more than conquest achievers, recognizing that sustainable security mattered more than temporary dominance. Trade routes favored species known for consistent operation over those with fluctuating capabilities. Diplomatic influence flowed toward civilizations that could guarantee long-term commitments rather than those offering immediate but uncertain advantages. Humanity's thousand-year persistence became the new benchmark for actual power, demonstrating that endurance could outweigh excellence when measured across sufficient timescales. Their approach redefined galactic power from technological dominance to resilient cooperation and long-term stability creation. This wasn't just a change in ranking, it was a fundamental rethinking of how civilizations should measure their security and influence. The Zephyrians found themselves recalibrating their entire strategic doctrine around these new principles. Their military assessments started including longevity metrics alongside capability measurements. Their diplomatic corps began prioritizing relationship depth over transaction volume. Their economic planners shifted focus from maximum output to sustainable operation. This redefinition affected everything from starship design to diplomatic protocols. Engineers started designing systems for continuous improvement rather than planned obsolescence. Diplomats focused on building trust networks rather than extracting concessions. Military planners emphasized adaptability over pure firepower. The entire framework for evaluating civilizations transformed practically overnight. The payoff came when, watching previously dominant powers struggle to adapt while previously overlooked species found new influence through demonstrated reliability. The galaxy didn't just get new leaders, it developed new criteria for leadership altogether. Strength became measured in centuries rather than conquests, in networks rather than territories, in stability rather than supremacy. So there I was finally understanding what Captain Sterling meant when he said the Dawn wasn't a ship, but a philosophy. The Zephyrians asked when the ship would finally be retired as outdated technology, expecting some planned decommissioning schedule or replacement program. Sterling's answer revealed a completely different relationship between humans and their technology that the Zephyrians hadn't considered possible. He stated the Dawn isn't going to break down, she's going to evolve rather than being retired. This simple declaration contained a completely different understanding of what technology could be. Where the Zephyrians saw inevitable obsolescence, the humans saw endless potential for adaptation. Their relationship with their ship wasn't owner and tool, it was partners in an ongoing journey. This whole ship of Theseus paradox became a living reality aboard the resilient Dawn parts, replaced but identity and purpose maintained across centuries of continuous operation. The philosophical question about whether something remains itself when all its components have been replaced ceased being theoretical and became practical reality. The answer the humans had discovered was that identity comes from continuous purpose rather than preserved materials. The ship embodied the human philosophy of continuous improvement and adaptive persistence in every weld seam and system interface. Its value wasn't in its original components but in its accumulated experience and evolutionary capability gained through 1,000 years of actual operation. Each repair had added not just new materials but new wisdom. Each upgrade had incorporated not just better technology but hard-won experience. The Sapirians began seeing the Dawn not as a collection of parts but as a living entity with its own history and wisdom accumulated across generations. They stopped measuring its age as deterioration and started recognizing it as maturation. The dents and scars became not evidence of damage but records of lessons learned. The mismatched components became not evidence of poor maintenance, but proof of continuous adaptation. This redefined how they thought about technology, value, and longevity across their entire analytical framework. They began considering that perhaps the most advanced technology wasn't what performed best today, but what could still be performing centuries from now. Their valuation models had to incorporate factors like adaptability and evolutionary potential, alongside raw performance metrics. The ship represented a philosophy where continuity comes from persistent purpose, rather than preserved components. Its identity wasn't tied to any specific piece of equipment, but to its ongoing mission and the accumulated wisdom of its continuous operation. This approach created something that became more valuable with time rather than less, more capable with age rather than obsolete. The Zapirian engineers, who had initially dismissed the Dawn as primitive, began studying its maintenance logs as philosophical texts. They weren't just reading repair records, they were studying a 1,000-year conversation between a civilization and its technology. Each entry represented another iteration in an ongoing process of adaptation and improvement. Another step in an endless journey rather than another entry in a depreciation schedule. This living philosophy challenged their entire approach to creation and maintenance. They had built things to be perfect once, while the humans built things to become perfect over time. One approach valued initial superiority while the other valued continuous improvement. And the Dawn's 1,000-year service record suggested which approach might actually be more effective in the long run. The payoff came when watching hardened military engineers have what amounted to spiritual awakenings about equipment maintenance. They started seeing technology not as tools to be used and replaced, but as partners in ongoing missions. Their entire relationship with their own systems began shifting from ownership to partnership, from control to collaboration. You know what finally made the Zapirians realize how completely they'd misjudged the timeline? They assumed human spacefaring history matched their apparent technological level, maybe a few centuries of struggling into space with primitive systems. Database analysis revealed the resilient Dawn was launched in 2387 on a 5-year mission that never actually ended, transforming what should have been a short exploration voyage into a millennium-long journey of continuous operation. The ship had been traveling through space for over 1,000 years through endless repairs and upgrades, each system replaced and enhanced so many times that nothing remained of the original vessel, except its name and purpose. Captain Sterling himself had aged centuries aboard the vessel he commanded. His extended lifespan, another technological marvel the Zapirians had missed in their initial assessment. This wasn't just a captain and his ship, it was a partnership that had endured across generations of star systems and civilizations. Humanity hadn't just recently reached space. They'd been spacefaring for millennium, longer than anyone realized. Their presence so quiet, and their technology so unlike standard galactic patterns that they'd remained effectively invisible to conventional detection methods. Their technology appeared primitive because it represented 1,000 years of evolutionary development rather than revolutionary replacement. Where other civilizations pursued dramatic technological leaps, humans focused on gradual, continuous improvement that accumulated across centuries. The Zapirians were looking at a civilization that had perfected persistence rather than progression, valuing reliability over novelty and endurance over innovation. This temporal miscalculation explained every anomaly in their initial assessment. The mixed materials, the contradictory energy signatures, the systems that shouldn't work together but functioned perfectly. They'd been trying to analyze a 1,000-year evolutionary process, using tools designed to measure static technological states. The ship's 1,000-year continuous service revealed humanity as ancient, spacefarers who chose evolutionary improvement over revolutionary replacement. This approach created technology that became more capable with time rather than obsolete. Systems that adapted to changing circumstances rather than requiring replacement. The Zephyrians had been measuring technological advancement in terms of innovation cycles while completely missing the alternative metric of continuous refinement. This discovery forced yet another reevaluation of human capability and intention. The battered exterior wasn't evidence of recent spaceflight achievement, but the visible record of extreme longevity. The mismatched components showed not poor maintenance but incorporation of technologies acquired across centuries of travel. The apparent technological simplicity concealed sophistication born of endless, practical refinement rather than theoretical design. The payoff came when understanding that the Zephyrians' entire assessment framework had been measuring the wrong things against the wrong timeline. They'd been evaluating humanity against civilizations that replaced technology every century, rather than those that improved technology continuously across millennium. This explained why their scanners couldn't categorize the dawn. They had no reference points for technology that evolved rather than being replaced, that accumulated capability rather than becoming obsolete. The hidden century transformed from a measurement error into a philosophical revelation about alternative paths of technological development. The Zephyrians began understanding that advancement could mean refinement rather than replacement, evolution rather than revolution, persistence rather than progression. This wasn't just about recalculating human history. It was about rethinking their entire understanding of what constituted advanced civilization. Here's how a single ship's revelation reshaped the entire galactic power structure. The Zephyrian Empire had dominated through technological superiority and military might for centuries. Their influence built on having better weapons and more advanced systems than anyone else. Their entire diplomatic strategy revolved around demonstrating clear technological advantages and overwhelming force projections to maintain their position. The resilient Dawn's capabilities forced a reevaluation of what actually constituted advanced civilization across every major government and scientific institution. Species began valuing stability, diplomacy, and long-term thinking over immediate technological superiority as they witnessed how human approaches created more sustainable outcomes. Military planners started considering resilience and adaptability as critical factors alongside firepower and shield strength. Trade networks reorganized around mutual benefit rather than exploitation within months of the incident. Major economic powers shifted from maximizing their individual advantages to creating systems that benefited all participants. Supply chains that had been heavily guarded became shared resources, with species recognizing that collective security mattered more than individual profit margins. Military strategies shifted from conquest to cooperation against common threats as commanders realized isolated superiority provided less protection than collaborative security arrangements. Joint defense initiatives replaced territorial expansion programs, with species pooling resources to address galactic-scale challenges rather than competing over individual systems. The focus moved from dominating neighbors to securing shared space. The Galactic Cooperation Council became the central organizing body rather than individual empires, its influence growing as species recognized the value of coordinated action over independent operations. What had been a relatively weak diplomatic forum transformed into the primary mechanism for resolving disputes and coordinating responses to galactic challenges. Its authority came not from military power, but from collective agreement that cooperation served everyone's interests better than competition. Humanity's influence grew not through domination, but through being essential to stability and problem-solving across multiple sectors. Their mediators facilitated agreements between long-standing adversaries. Their engineers helped solve technical challenges affecting multiple species, and their merchants created trade networks that increased prosperity without creating dependency. They became the glue holding the new galactic order together through practical contributions rather than forceful imposition. The galaxy moved from competing empires to cooperating civilizations as the old model of power politics gave way to more collaborative approaches. Species that had measured success in terms of territory controlled or rivals defeated began measuring it in terms of conflicts prevented and stability maintained. The fundamental metrics of galactic power shifted from military capacity to diplomatic effectiveness and economic Integration, humanity's demonstrated preference for cooperation over conquest created a more stable galactic order based on mutual benefit, rather than forced submission. Their actions showed that security could come from making everyone more secure, rather than making oneself impregnable, that prosperity could come from increasing overall wealth rather than concentrating it. This approach created systems that were more resilient, more adaptable, and ultimately more effective at maintaining peace and stability across the galaxy. The transformation wasn't instantaneous or universal, but it was comprehensive enough to redefine galactic relations for generations. Species began designing their institutions and policies around long-term stability, rather than short-term advantage, recognizing that true security came from creating systems that worked for everyone. The single battered ship had demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful thing you can deploy isn't a weapon, but a better way of thinking about power itself. So there I was, watching the resilient Dawn depart for the outer veil. Understanding this wasn't an ending despite everything that had changed. The Zephyrians assumed the revelation of human capabilities would mean humanity taking a dominant position in galactic politics, expecting them to leverage their newfound respect into concrete power structures and territorial claims. They anticipated diplomatic demands, economic concessions, perhaps even territorial expansions that would reshape the balance of power across known space. Instead, the Dawn continued its exploration mission as if nothing fundamental had changed, its battered hull turning toward uncharted space, while the galactic political landscape rearranged itself behind it. Captain Sterling stated, "There's always somewhere else to go, something new to discover, and someone who needed help as casually as if he were commenting on the weather, rather than explaining a 1,000-year mission philosophy." The simplicity of the statement contrasted sharply with its profound implications about human priorities. Humanity wasn't seeking dominance or control. They were committed to continuous exploration and assistance as ends in themselves. Their actions demonstrated that they measured success not in terms of influence gained or territory controlled, but in terms of discoveries made and civilizations helped. This wasn't some temporary posture from wine diplomatic advantage. It was the consistent behavior of a species that had maintained the same priorities for 1,000 years despite changing circumstances. The ship embodied the idea that the mission never ends. It just evolves into new forms and adapts to new challenges. Its departure wasn't a conclusion but a continuation, not retirement but renewal. The Zephyrians realized human power came from their relentless commitment to their original purpose, rather than from adapting their purpose to seek power. This consistency across centuries created a credibility that no sudden policy shift could ever achieve. The galaxy learned that the people aboard the Dawn had been quietly maintaining cosmic stability for centuries without demanding recognition or reward. Their departure signaled not retirement but continuation of their 1,000-year mission, demonstrating that for humanity, the work was never finished because the universe always offered new frontiers to explore and new beings to assist. This endless commitment became their defining characteristic, more impressive than any technological achievement or military victory. The Dawn's ongoing exploration embodied humanity's commitment to endless discovery and assistance rather than conquest or domination. Their philosophy valued the journey over the destination, the helping over the controlling, the discovering over the possessing. This approach created influence through service rather than through force, respect through consistency rather than through fear, and power through reliability rather than through threat. As the ship disappeared into the jump point, I understood that the real revelation wasn't about hidden technology or secret capabilities. It was about a species that had discovered that true strength comes from staying true to your purpose, regardless of changing circumstances, from helping others without demanding repayment, and from understanding that the mission doesn't end when you achieve something. It continues as long as there are still places to go and beings to assist. The point is that real power isn't about having the newest technology or the biggest weapons. It's about having the persistence to keep improving what works and the wisdom to help others do the same. When you file your report on galactic power structures, make sure you account for civilizations that measure strength in centuries rather than conquests. Tell the truth about what actually creates stability through cooperation and continuous improvement, suggesting resilience matters more than temporary superiority for maintaining real security. Let the consequences sort themselves out.